All right, welcome back to another episode of Small Guys Podcast. Today we're doing Dune Part 2. Paul Atreides unites with Chani and the Fremen while seeking revenge against the conspirators who destroyed their family. This movie has a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes across the board for critics and audiences. It's 2 hours, 46 minutes. We have a special guest who joined us on Power of the Rings, Rings of Power.
Rings of Power.
I've not seen the show.
You're all good.
Charlie.
Hey,
Charlie,
everyone.
we want to bring you in just because you're a fucking expert when it comes to this stuff, and we sound like idiots last week. So
Yeah, so
Nice.
we need a nice ratings booster this week, so that's why we brought you.
Right.
All right. Well, happy to help.
Try to keep this TV spot going, you know. So, but yeah, no. All in all, Charlie definitely has enough passion for movies. I feel like we do, at least for sci-fi movies. I'd take.
Yep.
Definitely. I mean, you have some knowledge on the books and stuff like that if you kind of want to go into it. You said that you've read 1 through 4, or did you read them all? I don't remember from what you said.
Yeah, I've done actually just the first 2, but the first 2 encapsulate what I believe Denis Villeneuve is looking to make into movies. So the first book is split into the 2 movies we've just seen, and then from what it sounds like, we're going to get a third, which is the book called Dune Messiah. So I've read those 2.
Mm-hmm.
Happy to go into why I haven't read more. It gets interesting, but Frank Herbert's writings, especially in Dune, are so foundational for so much sci-fi in terms of actual fiction, but then also in film. You've got to read it, you know, like any sci-fi nerd worth their salt's got to read these books. So, I've thrown down the gauntlet. I've challenged you to a battle like Jamis and Paul, and made thy knife chip and shatter.
well, and I heard in the book, the first book at least, there's not a ton of action, right?
No, there's quite a bit.
Okay.
There's quite a bit that goes on with the Harkonnens coming in, with how they kill off Leto, which I assume we're not worried about spoilers on any of this, especially for the first movie. Maybe for the second movie, but no.
Yeah, maybe Dune Messiah will try to.
Yeah,
not
so we'll
spoil
protect
too
that one.
much.
Sounds good. Yeah, so in the first movie, which is the first half of the first book, there's actually a good bit of action. And there's not really a clear delineation of when you're moving from the first part into the second part. I think he does have it's broken up into thirds in the way that he wrote it, if I recall. But don't, harsh critics don't come after me if I got that wrong. But yeah, it's got some action. But boy, this second movie really cashes in on all that world building, all that baseline character development, and they really bring it. It was intense. Like, I was sitting by Aiden when we went to see it, and there was multiple times where I just tapped on the shoulder, holy crap. It was intense, man.
Dude, it was fun. I think we really got to give it to that IMAX theater, because I feel like that made that experience 10 times better. Mm-hmm. And that theater's new for us too. So I think this is only the second or third movie we've seen in that MJR IMAX. And I mean, our IMAX, everyone knows this. Oppenheimer was the last time we went to the IMAX, and we went to a dome theater. But I mean, that one in general, you just feel every bit, every emotion, every sound effect. You feel like you're immersed in the, whatever you want to call it, the utopia, the movie, the whatever setting is on the screen at that point. It just makes it makes the viewing process just 10 times better, I feel like. Yeah,
I mean, the screen's better. It's louder in there. I saw it for the second time yesterday in IMAX again, but we were in the very back row. Mm-hmm. And when he rides a snake for the first time, it's like my seat was shaking from the sound. It was insane, but it was awesome as well. So
you read the snake?
Or worm. Did I say snake? See what I'm talking about? Worm, sorry.
Well, man, we're trying to do better this episode, all right?
Yeah, all right.
Lock it in.
That's Shai Halud to you, sir.
Shai Halud, okay. Yeah, so I do have another question for you. I saw online people were saying they want to read Dune Messiah now because they saw the movies, but they never read the first book. I saw, though, people were recommending, well, you should still read the first book because there's a lot of stuff the movie doesn't hit on, so you might be
Mhm.
confused reading Dune Messiah. Would you agree to that, or would you be okay just watching the movies and then reading that?
I could see why they might say that. I I definitely think you should read both, but the things that they change, which we can get into in
Hmm.
this movie, they don't really affect like the core of what we're going to see in the third movie.
Hmm.
Um, so I think if you truly didn't have time and you just wanted to keep going in the story, you could do it. But I mean, the second book, Dune Messiah, is really out there. Like the way even his writing style shifts because it becomes so much more in the minds of the different characters and what they're experiencing from their first person perspective. And if you just read that and you're like, wow, this guy writes some really trippy stuff. Whereas the first book's not quite like that. It's a little bit
Yeah.
more of your, a little bit easier to read. So I wouldn't recommend it, but you could do it.
Okay. Yeah, and I
So
also saw a lot of people online saying, too, that this movie, or the two movies, kind of ruined, like, Star Wars for them because they feel like Star Wars kind of copied off Dune. Star Wars movies obviously came before, but I don't know. What do you think of that? Do you think there's any truth to that? I mean,
what side are you on?
yeah.
It, it definitely doesn't ruin Star Wars. I think
No,
in many ways, it helps you to understand where Star Wars comes from, right? If you've
exactly.
Hmm.
never heard of this and you had no idea about it, Star Wars just arrives out of nothing, and you're like, oh, well, this is interesting. It's this mashup of Eastern and Western philosophy, dualistic view, and then this kind of messianic thing, but combined with this all this other weird stuff. And I guess it's just when Lucas decided to cram a bunch of different philosophies together and write a sci-fi novel, it worked. But
Yeah.
now you see it's a little bit richer than that because he's basing it in a lot of what was written here, as well as in other writers of the time. Um, and yeah, I think it makes it better. It makes Star Wars better. I think this is a fundamentally a better story. Like Star Wars, in my opinion, is derivative in a lot of ways. Like it pulls a lot of characters. It even literally just takes names from other things, other
Yeah.
stories,
Hmm.
other mythologies, etc. Whereas Frank Herbert, while he's no Tolkien, he's not making up real languages that are actually functional languages.
Yeah.
He is thinking about how do I get in and create an idea of the culture of the geology and the ecology and then the politics and the economics of this planet and this galactic empire that exists, and he's really thoughtful about building that world, which I don't feel like Lucas really does. But
Yeah.
Right.
so yeah.
I mean, from not having too much knowledge, I mean, growing up watching Star Wars, knowing more lore on Star Wars, obviously because we have more access to it, we
Hmm.
have multiple movies. You know, it's a whole franchise now. Um, but that's what I like about Dune is that like how you broke them down in between like the two. Like obviously we know more about Star Wars and there's more action. It's more entertainment. I feel like where this is like, all right, the story makes sense. You got to listen to every single part on just this 2 part movie that we've only seen so far. But
Hmm.
like I like how someone said that they like compared it to Game of Thrones, and it's like a Star Wars
Hmm.
Game of Thrones,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
that makes me appreciate it 10 times more as well. And you know, just going in. But the one thing that I hope, and like I said, we've only had 2 parts of a movie, 2 movies technically. Like they don't show too much space travel, which
Hmm.
is like one thing. Like they mention it, you know, it's a big thing, so I know eventually we'll get it. I think, I hope. I'm not too sure how the books go, but
Hmm.
that's like one thing that Star Wars established is like, you know, you in those movies, in the TV shows, everything, like there's a lot of space travel.
Yeah.
And
Right.
now in Dune, from what I know, not knowing a lot, I know that that spice is what allows them to travel in space.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like basically currency.
It's like the most valuable thing out
It's
there.
like their oil, I guess you could call it.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And in many ways, Herbert intentionally wrote this to have some allegorical elements to it. I mean, fundamentally, Dune doesn't even need to be in space.
Yeah.
Like you take space out of this and you just
Hmm.
put it in a continent
One.
on some planet, and people travel from different continents to take resources from somewhere,
Yeah,
and it's a perfectly good story. So
100%.
you could say that's maybe a negative, that
Sure.
like the space element is kind of arbitrary, but ultimately it's almost more of an environmental book and a commentary on politics and economics and colonial overreach and the way that it destroys cultures, and in this case it even hampers the development of healthy ecosystems, right? It's as much a commentary on that as it is this epic space saga that they've built
Sure.
it into be, which I think is unique in the sci-fi world, and it just
Yeah.
speaks to Frank Herbert's background. Like, just for context and for listeners as well, Frank Herbert was originally kind of a journalist, as I understand, and he wrote a lot of just normal pieces for newspapers and different magazines and things. And I think the inspiration for Arrakis as a world it was in the 50s. It was maybe like 10, 15 years before he wrote this. I think the book was written in 65. There was this program, and I believe it was in Eastern Oregon, where they were trying to. There was basically desert was encroaching on the farmland, and they were trying to create a buffer between this encroaching desert and this very valuable farmland. And so it was an experiment by, maybe it's the EPA, I think that might be the group that did this, of planting these different grasses and trying to create a way to hold back the encroaching desert. And I think it ultimately failed in a lot of ways. And Herbert went and investigated and he wrote about it. And a lot of the things that he saw there kind of started to trickle into this idea that he had of, all right, what if there was this planet that was entirely a desert? And there's all these different people competing for resources there, and it goes through these cycles of warmth and moisture, and then desert and heat and cold, and it goes. But then people start mucking about with it and messing it up, and then how all that impacts all the people that live there and the other animals that live there, and that ultimately, I believe, is the foundation of how he came up with this idea for Arrakis as a planet.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
It definitely makes sense. I mean, having that journalistic background is definitely going to help, like, just build a story like that.
Yeah, and I want to circle back too, just to say like the Game of Thrones comparisons, which I assume you've seen that, right, Charlie?
Yeah. I
Okay.
read 4 of those books. I watched all of it. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's a good comparison.
I mean, like, yeah, the Fremen kind of remind me of wildlings in a way, and then there's there's Jon Snow, which has a couple different bloodlines from powerful families involved, within him. There's families competing for a throne in a way, so there's a lot of comparisons there, and which is just another thing where I think Dune just inspired a lot of these different franchises or writers to write and come up with ideas just kind of based off what they read from that. And so I think that just proves how great and amazing the story is, truly. So in the universe they build. So um, I want to ask you too, and I want to know Aiden's thoughts as well. But what did you think of Christopher Walken being the Emperor? Did you, were you excited to see that, or were you nervous to see it? I just because I feel like he's a powerful person, obviously. So
Honestly, I was worried. I
okay,
told Aiden this. I was like, Christopher Walken is so cool, right? Like, he's got the swagger. He's like, ladies and gentlemen, the Foo Fighters. He's got that whole joie de vivre that is unique to him. And I was like, okay, the Padishah Emperor Carino the 9000th or whatever is this insecure, anxiety-ridden, but highly intelligent and calculating figure. There's no part of him that has any charisma because he doesn't need it. He's so powerful that it literally doesn't matter what anyone thinks about him. And so he's obsessed with his own security and almost just like a crazy love of his own power and success. So how's Christopher Walken going to do that when he's just so cool? I thought
right,
they nailed it by kind of making him look a little bit like haggard. His hair's all over the place, and they did the lighting, and it shows how aged he is. They didn't really dress him up real nice. And then he didn't have a lot of lines in
No.
his first few scenes. There was one scene towards the end when they're coming in, they're in the residence and they're going to have their battle. And he walks in and he has like a line. I don't even remember what he said because I've only seen it once. But like his whole delivery was like very Christopher Walken. Like, and I leaned over to him. He's like, "Oh, here he goes." But again, he did great. I was just worried that he was too cool to play that character, but he was not.
Yeah.
He did a great job.
And I still think, like, I mean, not knowing anything about him, like, obviously you read about him and you're anticipating on seeing him, you know, like just building that, like that build up until he's on camera. And we're lucky that we get like an opening scene with like them.
Yeah.
And but then you see him. I mean, like you said, like even before you were laughing, like he has too much swagger. Like he's gonna go in there and like what are we gonna expect? And remember, I asked you, I go, was he in Killers of the Flower Moon? But I was wrong because the movie I saw before, like a couple weeks ago, was Catch Me If You Can. Him and Leo.
Yep,
and
exactly.
I'm like, why I've just recently seen him. So I saw him in that, and then I rewatched Balls of Fury, and he was in that. I remember he's the headmaster ping pong player. So he gets on screen, I just can't stop but laughing.
Even Pulp Fiction, like he's in so many things.
But no, I mean, I think he did a great job, and like you said, they didn't dress him up too much. Like his daughter, like you can see her, like she's blinged out all that because she's trying to get like the hand in marriage from Paul or Fade and something like that. And but yeah, I mean, no, I think he did a great job. And like you said, he doesn't have that many lines throughout the entire film. So it's not like, like towards the end and all that, like his presence is like felt though, for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And then you go back and if you do rewatch that first part, going when they send them and then I don't know if you mentioned that like that person's name, but like those guys that roll their eyes back and can calculate everything in their heads.
Yeah.
Like those guys, he's like, what is this going to cost them to come deliver the message that you guys have to go to Arrakis, stuff like that. And then you go and think back and he's not even there. He sends a whole army, whole fleet, everything, for the setup.
Yeah. It was very, very expensive.
Oh yeah.
Well, and then too, I really want to hit on Austin Butler's performance. Before seeing the movie, there's a lot of hype around him being like the best villain of all time, better than Heath Ledger as the Joker, like all these comparisons. And when we went and saw the movie,
No Country for Old Men. Why am I forgetting his name?
Javier Bardem.
Javier Bardem.
Yeah, Stilgar.
Slash Stilgar.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess for the Austin Butler stuff, he doesn't show up till like an hour 15 in almost into the movie. So I was like, where is he? Like when is? But as soon as I just want to talk about the scene where they show their planet and the black sun, such a cool way to show it on screen with the black and white whenever they're outside was so cool. And then the fireworks too, like looking like ink blocks, it was amazing. So I just wanted to hit on that. But yeah, he did a great job for the scenes he's in.
That was that whole like it's like a little movie in a movie. That whole bit there was so cool. I was looking up some stuff after we went to see it. Apparently, they filmed the entire Coliseum scene. They filmed it in infrared to be able to get that stark black and white contrast. They didn't even film it with, I guess, normal cameras or maybe film. I don't know. It was all filmed in infrared. Thus, they got that huge contrast, which was really cool.
So
and I didn't even realize it was black and white until like maybe halfway through that when those like weird jester dudes came. I was like, wait, this looks weird. Oh, it's black and white. I see what's going on. And like they kind of like slid into that because there's not much color on that planet in the first movie to begin with. That was really interesting. I thought there was a little bit of a debt to be paid from the way that they've approached these as two separate movies, in the sense that they never Fade-Rautha is mentioned earlier in the books than he's brought up in this movie, in the second movie or the first movie. So he should have been in the first movie, to be honest. But I felt like the way they approached it, they're like, well, we really need to cast someone big, but we've already got a really big cast, and we don't know if we're going to do the second movie. Whatever the calculus is of producing these movies, I felt like that gap you're mentioning of like an hour and 15 in before we even see the big villain with the big name actor that everyone's here to see, is because they had to do so much kind of rebooting of the story and getting you into the world again that just got pushed back when it should have been there all along. So Yeah, to your question about like his performance, I thought his performance was great. I think he should have had a larger role in the overall story, which would have made him more complex. Like he was just truly like a psychopath,
Yeah,
which he played great. But a psychopath with like a little bit of subtlety and like you're not sure like how crazy he is.
yeah,
That's what like Heath Ledger as the Joker was. You're like, wait a minute, is he guy a genius or is he a psycho or is he both or what?
yeah,
Whereas
Right.
Fade Rotha, I saw no genius. I saw no political manipulation, like nothing interesting beyond this guy just is like a weird cannibal with no eyebrows who's a really good fighter and he literally hates everyone. So I thought he played that great, but as a character, like he's more than that in the book. He's truly sinister.
yeah. And that's one thing where I thought like, especially when you say that he came in like an hour in or hour 15 in the movie, like at that point, that's when I thought to myself like, are we ever gonna see him? And then everything turns black and white. You're on it's like Arrakis or something. It's like a little bit different. It's the
Yeah,
capital of Arrakis.
yeah. Oh yeah. Eric Keene.
Yeah, Eric Keene. So then they
Yeah,
go there, and I'm like, oh, here we go, right when I wanted it. And like you said, I mean, Heath Ledger's Joker, like from that opening scene of Dark Knight, like he's already established when he has that whole heist, and you're like, oh my gosh, like, and it's the first 20 minutes of the film, and you're already like locked in. And that's what I feel like on this one. He should have had, I mean, like you mentioned, like the casting, doing all that, like the statistics of it or the planning ahead, like all that stuff. It's hard, but they definitely should have mentioned him or like showed like a still from like his back, just a bald dude, and just kind of built up that like anticipation for that part two. Because then he
Yeah.
would have came on the screen. You would have been waiting from the start of that movie, like, all right, where's Fade? Where's Fade? And then finally they bring him in, and you're already like, that this guy's nuts. But like
yeah,
you said, I mean, he's just young. His brother obviously couldn't complete the task of wiping out House Atreides and stuff like that, and they're still taking out all their army and stuff like that. So, that's kind of where that story comes in. It kind of defeats the purpose of him being like a psychopath, like you said.
Yeah,
So it
and
kind
too,
of like,
like
hey, you can't do it.
they set up like Zendaya's character in the first movie. She's in like 7 minutes of it, right?
yeah.
And then obviously in this movie, she's a huge role. And I feel like they're
Huge.
almost doing that with Florence Pugh. I assume in Dune Messiah, she has a huge role, whereas in this, she's really not in it for too long.
Yeah, she Irulan, the princess that Florence Pugh plays, is much more prevalent in the books because at the beginning of almost every chapter, there is a history or an excerpt from her histories that she had written about the time. And so it's coloring everything. So the whole time you're reading the first book, you're like, wait, who's this princess and when is she going to show up? And then I think they first reference her maybe about halfway through the book. Um, and yes, you're exactly right. She's very important in the next book. Chani, Zendaya's character, is I think she's the biggest winner out of this whole thing. So one of the things maybe taking a step back, one of the things I love about these movies is the way that they intentionally change some things to make it resonate today. And it's not anything that's egregious that you would be, really upset by changing, taking out characters, etc. But the way that they changed Chani's character and some of her actions, I think is fascinating. And generally the way they treat women in this movie versus the book is a really compelling thing worth digging into. So no, maybe we should touch on that some.
Yeah. How would you say? Because I feel like in the movies, the women are very powerful, right?
Yeah,
Especially. I mean, Lady Jessica. I mean, we talked about it last week. She was like one of our favorite characters from the first movie. So,
hmm
I'm interested to hear what the difference would be compared to the book.
well, you've got this. Okay, so you've got the typical power structure. You've got this emperor who's a man, and you've got all these houses which have these royal bloodlines that pass down through, you know, kings or dukes and all, kind of this like European feudal setup. But then Herbert writes this really interesting um, group that's behind the scenes manipulating all, right? With the Bene Gesserits, right? The Bene Gesserit witch cult thing that's manipulating across thousands of years these narratives and mythologies, ultimately to bring forward this bloodline of this ultimate superpower, right? The Kwisatz Haderach, which Paul becomes. And so that's fundamentally awesome, right? Like that these women are here manipulating society, and it's not just the men running everything. But even still, I feel like Herbert wrote this book in 65 and then beyond. The context he's writing these things in, there's still not a lot of opportunity for women in power. You don't see a lot at that time in um, economic leaders, CEOs, spiritual leaders, political leaders. And so, you don't see him get too outside the box other than creating these contexts. When Villeneuve takes this story and he updates it for 2020s, what I think he's conscious of is we need something to show that it's not just this one set of women that are kind of running things behind the scenes and everyone else is doing this other thing, but we truly need a character who breaks out of the tide of history. And this is what I love about Chani, what they do with Zendaya and Chani, and it probably speaks to why they cast Zendaya in this role, because they probably knew they were going to do this. If you think about the entire story, every character is ultimately kind of trapped in their path, who they have to become, right? The Atreides have to go to Arrakis, even though they know it's a trap. And Duke Leto ultimately dies tragically, just like his father. And, the Harkonnens are your classic bad guys, their own hubris and greed, and they get destroyed. Even the Bene Gesserit, they ultimately, they've been trying to create this superpower, but then they get tricked by their own machinations, by Jessica, not obeying what they said and bringing the Kwisatz Haderach in a generation early, messing up all their stuff. The Emperor, he's trying to hold on to all this stuff and manipulate both these houses to eradicate the rising Atreides, to keep the Landsrad, which is the groups of all the houses, like in check, so he can basically pass it down to his daughter. And they ultimately, all of them get exactly what was intended for them. Even Paul doesn't want to become this messianic figure that creates this huge uprising that gets all these people killed, but he ultimately does it anyways. Lady Jessica, she's driven by her love of Duke Leto and then the love of her son, and then she gets kind of wrapped up in this whole messianic thing, and she's doing it all to make sure that they get revenge. And then she finds out, well, actually, I'm just I'm one of the Harkonnens anyways, and so it's all pointless. He doesn't say that, but you can see how they never break free. They're all stuck in their lanes. The one person in this movie that actually breaks out of what's expected of them is Chani. She doesn't fall in with everyone else. Like these crazy fundamentalists from the South, they're doing all this stuff. I'm not supporting what you're doing, Paul. And ultimately, at the end, with Paul decides he's going to marry Irulan and become the emperor, she's like, all right, peace, I'm out of here. She goes and gets her sandworm and rides off. And I think that's a change that doesn't happen in the book. Gotcha. There's a number of other things that happen around Chani that they don't have in the movie, because it wouldn't fit this idea that she's this one independent female character who ultimately goes alone. She's okay. So here's my hot take. She's the hero of the story. Paul's not the hero. Chani is the hero, the way that Villeneuve has changed it. She's the individualistic person who's willing to go her own way based on what she thinks is right, and not give in to all this pressure of society and politics and economics that's going on around her. And she'll ultimately pay a huge price, I imagine. I think that's compelling. I think that's the only reason I can think of why they changed a lot of stuff about her and Paul and their relationship. And it could make this story really interesting. how she enters into the new movie with Dune Messiah based on what
Yeah.
she does at the end of the movie is going to be cool to see how they tie it in. So that's my
And,
rant.
and no, honestly, to I think this furthers your point even more. The fact that the first movie starts with Chani talking,
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
this last one ends with her
Hmm.
leaving. I think that is like that just proves your point. And to talk about Timothy Chalamet as Paul, the character development from the beginning of the first movie to this at the end of the second movie is quite incredible too, just to
Hmm.
see how
Yeah,
much the character's changed. And then by the end of it, you're like, wait, am I rooting for the villain now? Like, you know, obviously the Harkonnen are villains, right? They're cannibals, they're terrible people. Like, you're supposed to be rooting against them. But now he's going to take over as the emperor. He's trying to, and then he's going to embark on this holy war. It's like, well, now am I rooting for the bad guy? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So
yeah.
that's a thought I'm having too. And I was curious to see. I mean, Aiden, is that how you felt? I wasn't sure
Yeah.
if that's how most people felt or what.
I mean, watching part one, like the day before going in to see part two, like the way that Paul's character arc just completely 180s, like it's insane. And that's why, like, I felt like I missed something watching the second part because I'm like, no way this guy, like, the balls on this guy, like, he's standing up in front of all those, all those people, all those followers, I guess. And it's like a joke at some point, like, especially even at the beginning of the second part when he's like yelling at Lady Jessica, his mother, like, you're lying to these people, like, you know, planting this false fiction, like all this like this false power in their heads. And like you said, it's been going on for thousands of years. And then now it's coming to fruition and he's taking that power, he's seeing it. And I don't know if it's like, I mean, it all kind of happens in the movies once he gets his first kill. Like once he kills that guy at the towards the
Jameis.
end, yeah,
Hmm.
at the end of part one, like that's when you kind of see in his eyes and the way that his character approaches every next like action or anything that's happening like in his story basically. So then you go, I mean, you just see him at the end of part one and then you see him at the end of part two and it's insane. And like I'm 100% 100% rooting for Paul. Like I'm locked in because he's going to go on and I mean, who knows what happens after this. I need to read the books. But I mean, like you said, kind of with um I think the biggest, like the craziest thing that happened in part two was when he finds out that he's Harkonnen, and you know he has that bloodline, and then he kills Fade. I'm gonna spoil it, you know, and he goes, "You fought well." What does he say, cousin or something like that? Yeah,
Yeah.
basically, and you
Yeah.
know, and he killed his grandfather. So
I think he says you fought well, Atreides, because that's what he said
did
earlier in
he?
the Coliseum too. Yeah, when
Yeah.
he kills
Or
Celeste.
no, Paul says cousin to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, Paul says
Yeah,
cousin to him.
yeah.
But yeah, I feel like, and this is like my Emperor Strikes Back moment, and I
Mm-hmm.
gasped audibly when we were in the theater when it's revealed the Baron is his grandpa.
Mm-hmm.
I like gasped. I'm like, oh my god, like I and when I went yesterday, I was seeing with people who hadn't seen it, and I was just like looking at their faces to see their reactions because I was shocked
Yeah, it's a
when
great
I saw
reveal,
that.
man. And especially like when Lady Jessica says that, he's like, "You knew." She's like, "I didn't know until I drank the,
The
uh,
water,
yeah, the water."
Hmm.
yeah,
So it's like, God, like that
worm
was the best
piss.
part because there were so many things in part one that didn't make sense to me, and then watching part two, like it fills everything in,
Hmm.
like it full circles, and everything that I had questions on were answered in part two.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So that's what makes it a good sequel as well.
It was very good. And another thing that I love the way Villeneuve treats the story is he brings elements that Herbert intended people to understand in Dune, but they didn't really understand at the time. He brings that into this story. Um, as I understand it, when folks read Dune, just like when we watched the first movie, we're all like, you know, Paul is Luke Skywalker. He's Frodo. He's our hero. He's our guy. And even after seeing or reading the whole books, people were people didn't pick up on Paul's reluctance to become this messianic character. And so I love how Villeneuve actually, and it, honestly, I was trying to think about how I knew, other than the fact that I knew, like, how would the audience know that there's something kind of bad that is going to result from this? Obviously, you know, he's got kind of the visions of the people starving in the desert and his mom. We've got all the visions from the first movie of like the mountain at war and fighting and just all the death that's going to come out of it that Paul talks about. Um, but I honestly think it came down to a little bit of editing, maybe a way that they cut some of those scenes as the energy of the story is picking up in the second half of this movie, where Paul's galvanizing his troops, and you're so nervous when he gets up in front of all those people and they all start cheering and they're like, "Holy crap, we're going to war! This is going to be nuts!" You're still in the movie when I watched it. Maybe you guys tell me what you saw here. I was like, oh no, this is like watching an avalanche. Like it's the beginning of an avalanche that's going to destroy everything below it. And I thought it was a little bit of the way it was cut. It was also the music. The music wasn't just this like epic John Williams. Matt, it had like some tone. I want to go back and listen to the music to see like how Hans Zimmer did this, but I felt the tension. I felt the like
100%.
this is not a good thing that's about to happen,
no.
which I thought
Like
was
it's
cool.
building to something.
Yeah. Did you guys
Yeah.
feel any sense of dread as this was all, and not just like they might get wiped out by the Emperor and the Harkonnens, but did you feel any dread of Paul becoming Muad'Dib?
Yeah. So I mean, and like you said, the music was eerie, and it's not even. It's like more where like you're relaxed, and then you start sitting up. The longer it goes on, especially when he calls that one guy out, like he's like, "You want to battle me? I know it." He's like, "But you, so and so," and he just goes on this rant, and it's just nonstop, and it's locked in on Paul's face and the guy that's like, contemplating going up there, taking this power from him, like just basically putting the match out on this like fire before it starts. And that's when I was like, oh, like what's gonna happen? And then he just keeps going, and it just builds to that part where the guy, and you think he's gonna like flip, and then he just completely says "Lisan al Gaib" and takes the knee. It's
Yeah.
like, oh man. Then once that part happened, like it was just a sigh of relief, and it's like, oh no, like what's gonna happen? And every part from like that point kind of going on, because when you watch part one, right when it gets to that good part that you've been waiting for the entire movie, it cuts. So that's how I felt throughout the entire finale of part two, was that every time something good was going to happen, I thought it was going to just cut to black. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't do that again. Like I can't have that anticipation, that cliffhanger waiting another year, 2 years, 4 years for part three. So I'm going, and that's what like the icing on the cake for this movie with me is that every time I thought that was going to happen, I was wrong. And we got to see the battle. We got to see and let alone we'll get into the big battle after this with the sandworms and all that. But then you get to the part where he confronts Baron, and I thought it was going to cut after that. Then I was like, oh, we're saved. And then they have the fight with Fade and Paul, and I'm like, oh, we're not even going to see this epic battle between these two that we've been waiting for this entire film, and we got it. So
Yeah.
it just got better and better for me.
Yeah, I don't think I was too worried about where it was going to end, because I knew part two would be the finale to the book, like how the book somewhat wrapped up. I just mainly didn't want it to end because it was so good, especially that third act.
Exactly.
Was like that third act is like one of the best things ever. Like it was so awesome just watching it all unfold. But I think the first time I watched the movie, I didn't know if there was a certain degree of him putting on an act for Chani and some of the people, some of the Fremen that didn't believe in the religion. But watching it the second time, I did realize that no, he did fully not want to go into that because he was so worried about his visions. Like I think it took me a second time to see it for it really to click in my head and see the character development, the true character development from where he started at the even beginning of this movie. I think he was still pure, even though he had killed Jamis. But I want to ask you, Charlie, because I was really curious about it the second time watching the first movie and the second movie. What is the significance behind the Jamis character? He saw visions a lot of in the first movie of him teaching him things, and then in the second movie, right at the end, or the last like 30 minutes, he puts his hand down in the sand. He says, "Talk to me, Jamis." So it's like this character, this person in the movie has a lot of significance to Paul, but they really didn't have anything together physically. It was all just in the visions.
So some of it is interpretation by Villeneuve. But ultimately, there's two things happening there, I think. One, Paul as the Kwisatz Haderach and that being activated by all the spice he's getting into, basically can see the future and the past. He can bridge space time. And so he is seeing visions of the future, but he's also communicating through that somehow in some weird way. In addition, Paul takes Jamas's role in the Fremen. He takes Jamas's life. He becomes Jamas in the Fremen society. That's lost a little bit in the movies because one aspect, Paul Jamas has a wife, and Paul actually takes his wife. So he takes his wife and his kids, and they're now his wife and his kids, along with Chani, and some other stuff that go on there too. They eliminated that character. They kind of rolled Jamas's wife into Chani's friend, who I actually don't even know what her name is. I can't remember from the if it was mentioned, but it's their friend who dies in Siege Tabor when they bomb it out and they come in and they torture. They basically roll a few characters that were cut out of the movie into that one person. But you lose that. You don't realize that, okay, so he has taken Jamas's role in society. And so they're connected through that. So I think that's the significance of Jamas, is that Paul takes his position and carries it forward. It's almost a sacrificial thing. And because Paul can move through space and time, and Jamas is kind of somewhat aware of this, he almost even, they don't really show it, but I almost feel like Jamas knows he's going to lose this fight. He almost knows like he is enabling the arrival of Muad'Dib by engaging in this. Because I recall in this first movie there was like some reluctance, like to get into that fight, right? And it's also a little bit of like Fremen culture of like the only way to become the leader is to kill the leader, and so they touch on that with Stilgar when Paul wants to speak at the council. He's like, "Oh, just kill me! Just kill me! You can talk at the council. It's cool, no problem. Kill me." That's way more complex and I think interesting in the books in the way it's written, because there's all this tension and conflict about it. Because Stilgar loves Paul and Paul loves Stilgar, and they actually get a lot closer to actually fighting it out in the book. And then obviously Paul does exactly what he does in the movie, where he says, "No, I'm not going to waste this really valuable general as well as a friend. I'm just going to change the rules because I'm Paul Muad'Dib Usul. I'm going to do what I want."
Right. Yeah. And him drinking the water of life really just unlocks the potential completely, right? For him being able to see to the future and the past and all that. And which I thought was really cool. And honestly, even that fight at the end, I was like, well, he knows he's going to make it through because maybe he's seen visions as to how things will go. We see like Josh Brolin's character being nervous, like, why does he take such risks? But it's like, no, he probably knows that he's going to make it through this fight. And that's something I was thinking about even on my first watch through. I'm like, no, he's confident he'll make it because he knows he'll make it.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I had a couple questions on that as well. It's also like, because I mean, does Paul, every action after drinking the water, is it because he knows the outcome? So is he pulling like some Doctor Strange stuff where he's, he already knows like what he has to do? Like he's going to take the princess's hand and stuff like that. Like he has to, like because he doesn't have any second thoughts of like taking it, even with Chani behind him,
Yeah. The way I read it and the way I interpreted what we saw is that Paul sees various possible paths. So think like multiverse splintering type stuff, right? Like what's that one movie? Everything All at Once.
Everywhere All at Once. Yeah.
Right. So kind of like that. Of you have these fractured paths. They don't get into multiverse, obviously, but like that's what I think Paul is seeing, is certain ways that this could go. So I think at one point in the movie, he has that line where he says, after he's drank the water of life, it's like, I now see there's a very narrow path for us to accomplish our goals, to get our revenge, etc. But it's going to be very tough. He says something to that effect. So I don't think it's like this deterministic, I know the future, so I have no fear, I'm going to take all these risks. I think he still knows this could go sideways really quickly. There's this very narrow path we have to walk, and we have to take these steps. If we do that, it's possible. So
Mm,
no, I think there's fundamentally risk there, and that's what makes it interesting.
right. Yeah, no, that's a good way to look at it. But yeah, that's immediately where my mind went to. It was like, is it like a Doctor Strange situation where he sees all these different futures and he knows what to do? So that's why there was a little confusion there as to how insane his abilities just got amped up by drinking the water, and how things have changed from this point on. Because after he drinks that water, he's fully in that role now of the Messiah. Like he's running shit now. Like
And he is just like his mother. He is overwhelmed with thousands of years of knowledge, right? Yeah. So just like the Reverend Mother, he's got all the people in his brain, all their experiences. So I think that's partly where Paul just is like, he is all gas, no brakes from that point forward, because he's just surrounded by the tide of history pushing him forward. Yeah. I honestly think that's when Paul loses control. Like Paul loses all of his concern about what could happen, because he's no longer the only person in his head. He's got all these other people in his head, and they're all, we want the Kwisatz Haderach. We are going to make this thing happen. So he's enslaved by the very thing that he was resisting, which is super interesting for your hero to get wrapped.
No, that's insane, and that's why I hope we see more of that in like part 3, like all that history, like all that lore and all that, like, and it's just gonna be an ongoing battle. Like Lady Jessica speaking to Paul's sister in her stomach, and everyone's looking at her like, "What the hell is this lady up to?" Like, like she's a witch.
Yeah, and the baby's fully conscious too, and is having conversations back,
which is another thing that we can get into. But I kind of want to touch on the fact, me personally, I felt like I missed a part of the movie when Paul's. So do their eyes turn blue for the Fremen? The Fremen. Fremen. Due to the spice, because like Lady Jessica drinks the water of life and her eyes go blue. But Paul, like, while he's learning the ways of the Fremen, he's riding the sandworm. It's like right before Chani and him are on that dune, and they basically like start their relationship, and she's like, "I'll teach you the ways, or I'll show you the ways of the Fremen." And then after that, we see Paul and his eyes are all bright and blue, and that was before he drank the water of life. So I'm curious to how that plays like a role. Like, how does that?
Yeah. So it's called the eyes of Ibad is the term that they use for it, the blue eyes of the Fremen, and it's from prolonged exposure to spice. It's just something in their bloodstream makes their eyes go blue. It happens immediately to Lady Jessica because she's just drank the concentrated worm piss, the water of life. It happens to Paul slowly. I think if I remember, there's a cut there, right? She's like, they're on the dune. She's like, "I'll teach you this," and then we kind of jump forward, and then they're out there, and they're. What was the sequence of it? He rides the worm earlier, and then they have their dune little smooch, and then is that when they start, like when they're attacking the miner, or was when they're attacking the miner? Was that before he rode the sandworm? I can't remember. When like he's part of the Fedaykin out there, like actually disrupting.
So
they did the little straws out of the sand, and then
So that stuff's before the worm.
Okay, all right. I was thinking maybe there was a big cut there, but no, the answer to your question is that all their eyes go blue because they're on the spice.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Bunch of junkies.
I wonder too, if a Fremen baby is born, do they have blue eyes right away? Because the mother maybe has experienced spice and has blue eyes already. Like, I wonder how that would work as well.
I don't know.
Or maybe just a baby at 3 months would have the blue eyes develop it. I don't know. Yeah. That's pretty interesting to think about as well.
But let's go to the Paul faces the worm. the sandworm for the first time.
How
man. Like,
cool.
dude, it was so sick, man. And that's what brings my part up about like seeing it in IMAX. Like, just it makes the experience just so much better because we're going and we see and they got the thumper in the sand. Everyone's just chilling back, like watching from the bleachers, basically. And he goes, he's like, "Call a big one." And then he starts pounding on the sand. Chani's told him go lower. He goes lower, and this grandfather sandworm starts coming from deep out. And then you're like, everyone just was like, "Holy shit!" And it just feeds that Lisan Al Gaib, narrative that they're pushing because it's so early in this movie too. Where he's going, and people are still contradicting if he is or if he isn't. But I mean, I don't know. Like, that's the first time we've seen like face to face someone riding a worm.
Yeah, the fact that he was able to do something like that was able to help his mom convince the naysayers that, hey, this is the Messiah, like this, So I think that whole point of it really helped as well, just kind of doing their facade of tricking these people in a way.
And remember, because Lady Jessica is like shocked, like she's scared when they bring her in to hear the news, and they're like, "Oh, he died, and now everything's ruined. Everything that they've been planning is done." And then they're like, "He rode the biggest worm." It's just perfect, exactly what she wanted.
Yeah, it's cool that he rides the grandfather worm, but what I wonder is if there is this connection between Paul and the worms because of his somewhat psychic abilities magnified by the spice. The worms create the spice, right? It's basically like they excrete it out, right? And so I wonder if like him calling the biggest worm and having this power is not just like, maybe it is luck, who knows, but maybe there's some connection between these creatures in this planet and Paul, and I don't know. It's super cool though, the way he's able to.
It's more than a coincidence.
I think it's more than a coincidence, and again, maybe they get into it beyond this book that I've read, but that's as close as Dune gets to like a spiritual aspect. Star Wars is straight into like the Force and how, and they do a little bit with the what was the little organisms that create the Force? What's that called? The midichlorians. I wouldn't say mitochondria, but the midichlorians. This is as close to that as Dune gets, right? The spice has some psychoactive element, some psychedelic experience that is almost spiritual, that connects creatures across this planet. And I find that cool that, Herbert kind of dabbles in it. Obviously, he wrote in the 60s. Everybody was into all kinds of weird stuff in the 60s.
Yeah, and I want to say too, before we get to the final battle part of the movie, I'm interested to see, because from what I've heard, like Dune Messiah, the book, it's kind of weird, right? Some weird stuff happens, and I'm interested because like the second time I went to go see this movie, when Lady Jessica's talking to her baby and the baby starts talking back, there was some laughter in my theater because how ridiculous it might seem to someone who's not familiar with the Dune universe and how that story works. So I'm interested to see if Villeneuve will push the strangeness, the weirdness, or tone it down. I'm interested to see what they do with the next movie.
Yeah, well, I think he's going to nail it. I think they will. 100%. I think they'll have a cinematographic challenge with so much of it gets truly into their conscious experience, and like it's constantly flashing between different realities in their brains. How you're going to film that and how you're going to communicate that, there'll be voiceovers and all this stuff, and they kind of touch on it with as Paul goes in and out of his stuff in this movie. That'll be tricky, but to be honest, the laughter that you're talking about is exactly why they made this change. So in the book, Aaliyah is born. She's born and she's like 3 or 4. She's like 3 years old, 4 years old. She's like a little toddler in the final scene, the fight scene in the residence. So, and she has full conversations like a an adult person as this little child, and it's what throws everyone off in the book. They're like, oh my gosh, who is this 2-year-old that's perfectly cogent, knows all these things, and is really smart? Can you imagine trying to film that and like put that on screen and not have it be an absolute joke? Like there's the whole time I was thinking like, oh yeah, you remember in Twilight when they had like the little baby with like the weird face and it was like awful? That's why Villeneuve changed it. I gotta believe it's like we're gonna tease Anya Taylor-Joy as Aaliyah in the next movie. We're gonna keep it as like this little baby with this little fetus, which was actually super cool the way they did that.
Kept showing it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's just got to be like they saved themselves the headache in the last.
I did see a clip from the '84 Dune film, and I saw Aaliyah in there in like the way that because she's the one that kills Baron. She's the one that kills him, and I just saw like a clip. She's holding her finger. She has the voice, so she's already using it on like to get through like certain scenarios and stuff like that. And I mean, she's a toddler, like you say. She's got bright blue eyes, and she's telling people what to do. She's using the voice on them, and then she's like lifting a finger and she's killing people. It's like what is going on?
Yeah,
I heard
it's hard to do well.
I heard too she was like traumatized from her birth because she was conscious and like remembers it and all that stuff too. So it's like, will they even embark in that? Like, I don't know. I'm curious to see where they go from that point for her character, but.
I suspect they'll bring it back. I suspect we're going to get a lot of time with Aaliyah in the next movie, and she's going to be talking with somebody about that experience of being born and remembering it all and the trauma that comes with that.
Yeah.
I think Anya Taylor-Joy is going to be incredible in this role. Aaliyah is interesting because she is both in the next movie, I think she's like a teenager. She's like, maybe she's like 18 or in her 20s, something like that. So she's a young woman, but she's also got like all of this knowledge, thousands of years. So she's got this maturity, but she's also this young person. So she's kind of this mixture of like this childlike thing. And Anya Taylor-Joy is gorgeous, right? So like Aaliyah has to have like these really like pretty wild sexual experiences in the story, and that's going to happen in this next movie. I'm like, she's going to pull that off for sure. She's gonna nail that like kid thing that's becoming this weirdly sentient child that's sexually out of her mind. It's going to be interesting. I promise you, it'll be interesting.
Well, and two, I wonder how long it'll take till Dune Messiah even comes out. Do they need the actors to age up a little bit? I mean, Timothée Chalamet kind of has a little bit of a baby face, so like maybe he won't age as well as you'd want him to age come in like 5 or 6 years, right? And you still want to build off the hype from what this movie's going to make like box office wise, right? And keep the audience. So I'm interested to see all that. Right, yeah, and you wouldn't want to. The job he's done as Paul's amazing, I feel like, so far. So, yeah.
Yeah, I bet we see it in like maybe December 26, maybe 27, something like that. I bet that's when we see the next movie. I don't think they wait. I think they go through this little bit of a cycle. They've already got it all. It sounds like they've already got the screenplay pretty much ready to go. So they start production next year. Who knows?
Right.
Get it out by 26. That's what I'd expect. So.
Yeah. Now the final battle scene, does that remind you guys of like Battle of the Bastards or the Rings, like this grand scale of people fighting each other? Like, is that what you guys kind of felt like when you were watching that part of the movie?
Yeah, that's a good comparison.
Lord of the Rings. Just the anticipation behind it, like knowing that it was coming, and then finally getting to see it reminded me 100% of Lord of the Rings. Yeah, and in that like fact, like, I mean, it wasn't even like it was an insane battle. Like it's not over. Like that's not the Holy War, you know?
Right.
Like that's just the battle before the Holy War, and that's what makes it like even better because you know that there's more to come. Even though it was on like, and that's like seeing this movie like it was an epic, like, and it's only a part 2. Like it feels like a finale to this entire franchise, this entire story, but it's not. You know, like, and that's where we get to that end and the resonance and all that. But I mean, just sitting there watching it on a scale like that at the theater, like it's just always what you've been wanting. I think it pays off 100%.
Yeah, I think it's a really good comparison to both of those scenes, right? The Battle of the Pelennor Fields, the Battle of the Bastard. It's really good. You know what I was thinking of the whole time when they launch the nukes and they blow up the mountain and then the worms come in. I was remembering that awful part of the third movie of The Hobbit when they bring in the worms through the mines and that's where all the orcs come pouring out. I was like, okay, now I get where Peter Jackson got that idea from. He got it from Dune. Because that's exactly what it is.
Dune just did it 10 times better.
Way better, way better.
But just going like from the horizon, just seeing like that sandstorm, the storm that they're going from the north to the south in, like traveling through it, which is also a scene that I love, is seeing like 8 different worms all in transit, you know, and everyone, they have carriers on them, they have all this, like, because that's the first time you only think you ever see just one person riding a worm, and it's just for like enjoyment or it's whatever. I didn't know that they actually use them for travel.
Yeah.
So, like,
there's like 40, 50 people on each one. There's a ton.
And they're literally all migrating south. And like, I'm like, holy shit, man. And then that comes in, you know, through the smoke. Everyone's retreating back towards the worms. And then the worms come in. And you just see how big they are. And you don't realize.
The Emperor's ship, too. The Emperor's ship looked amazing. Like, it's incredible.
Awesome.
When that ship came in, that was one of the moments where I leaned over to Ada. I was like, oh my gosh. Okay, the ship is like this orb, this chromed out orb, and the visual of it coming over Arakeen and the reflection in the orb as it passed over in that camera angle. Maybe it was the IMAX. I don't know. I was like, holy crap, that is an incredible shot. Like, what a good movie. There was a couple scenes like that in this movie where I was like, I don't understand how all the movie stuff works as good as you guys, but I was like, that was good.
No, well, I mean, even that's the thing about Denis Villeneuve is that he did Arrival, and we've all seen Arrival, right? When you know those big horizontal with the flat back ships come in and they're just hovering over like a continent, all scattered around the world, and everyone's just looking at them like, what is this? Like, it just stands out, and you know it's alien. And then they had those exact same ships as it was either the Harkonnen ships or the Emperor's ships.
You're right.
And you saw them in, and I was like, oh my gosh. I'm like, I knew that I was going to bring it up here. And I'm like, dude, it was a complete insert, just a copy and paste. I'm like, dude, when you watch Arrival, how big those ships are on like a grand scale, then you bring the Emperor's ship up, and you're like, holy shit, like 100 of these can fit in that one. It's just huge.
Yeah, I would say for me, one of the first scenes that gave me like chills was when the Harkonnen soldiers, right at the beginning of the movie, are they have to run to the rocks because the worms coming, and they have to like float up. And at this point, like we've gotten a little bit of Hans Zimmer's music, but we haven't gotten it to the full extent yet. But like that scene is completely quiet, and like in the grand scope of things, the eclipse happening and the rocks are getting a little bit darker, and it's just. You know, it's the whole planet background right behind it. It's just them going up slowly, quiet. Like you don't know what's going to happen next. And it's like that scenes like that is like, holy shit, this is cinema. Like this is why we come to the movies. Like I just knew we were in for a treat right at the beginning when I saw that. It was like, whoa, this is like Space Odyssey. Like this is all these like great movies that I grew up with, and now I feel like I'm watching one of these sitting here right now, and it felt incredible.
100%.
Yeah.
Even like someone made a note like on YouTube or something is when they're scaling, like, you know how fake it looks, like they have the anti-gravity suits, but they're not flying. Like they have to be close, and you see like as much as it looks like a rope or a wire's like strung behind them on the reflections, it's just natural. Like you see each of their movements, you don't see any wires, like it's just straight reflection going up those rocks, and it's just
so cool.
It's so good.
That was really good. That was such a cool way to start. Like, oh yeah, remember Dune? That's what we're doing here. That's what that was like.
Yeah,
oh my gosh,
we're not fucking around. Yeah. And I want to hear you guys' thoughts on this because I wasn't too sure how I felt about it. Paul killing the Baron, I kind of wish there was just a little bit more of a climax there. He kind of just walks up and like stabs him in the throat.
Mm.
I kind of wish it was a little bit more of a battle. And I'll even say the same thing for like Dave Bautista's character. He kind of just gets stabbed and that's it. You see him use the whips a little bit, but there's no real fight like we get at the end with Paul and Austin Butler's character. And I don't know if maybe that was just to save time. I think that's kind of, if I'm nitpicking the movie, those two deaths were a little too fast for me, and I wanted a little bit more. Maybe Paul. I know Paul was kind of saving his face for like the final reveal, but like I kind of wish the Baron could have seen that Atreides killed him. The Duke's son. So that's kind of something that kind of irked me a little bit. I don't know if you guys felt the same way or did it bother you at all.
Well, I mean,
Did Paul not reveal his face to the Baron when he killed him?
No,
was still wrapped up?
No, but,
Yeah.
when he kills the Baron, he sees his
says-
eyes, and he's
Yeah,
like, he knows,
and he calls him
before he
grandfather.
stabs him. Yeah.
I just wanted a little bit more of a battle just to kind of kill the Baron, and I know he's already injured and stuff, and his spine thing was already taken out, so it made sense. But I just kind of wanted something a little bit more grand. I feel like.
I did like it. He's like, you die like an animal. I was like, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Psycho.
No, I mean, that part was great because when the Emperor arrives and he's kind of interrogating the Baron, or not even interrogating him, but confronting him, and he's like, you don't know who Lisan al-Gaib is? Like, you have no idea who he is? And he's like, no, he's just a false prophecy or whatever. Like, I don't know. Like, he's just been taking out our ships. He had no idea that it was Atreides. And that just makes it so much better. And that's when, like, when he shows his face, Fade's eyes light up. He's like drooling like Pennywise, basically.
Yeah.
And he goes, he's like, like he's there for it. He loves it.
Yeah. Interesting.
But, no, I love that reveal. I thought it was great. But I mean, like you said, it does make sense where he didn't like make a grand entrance, but he doesn't really have to. He's there for revenge, and that was it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he could have easily killed the Emperor too, but he spared him.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very calculating. It's very smart. He's because the one thing that they don't get too much into is you've got the Landsrad, which is basically all the different houses, right? And they're a huge threat to everyone, in addition to the Harkonnens and the Atreides and the Emperor. So you didn't really get a sense of how important they are, but it's important to Paul that he doesn't just kill off the Emperor, because then he has no support from the Landsrad. They're just going to see him as this upstart who murdered the Emperor and needs to be put down, and they would do it because sheer numbers. There's also, you've got what are they called? The Spice Guild. I think that's what they're called, something to that effect, they basically control all travel. So you can't get from Arrakis to Getty Prime to I'm trying to remember Paul's homeworld. Doesn't matter.
Kaladin or something.
Kaladin, yeah. You can't get there without these people. Like they basically are monopoly controlling all travel throughout the galaxy.
Yeah.
Paul can't.
TSA.
Yeah, exactly. More like Delta. Paul can't. He can't take over the galaxy if he doesn't have a way to get there. So he can't just piss everybody off. So I love how calculating he was in the way he got his revenge, but then he turns to the bigger picture. And I think that's why it's so cool that they have the big battle. They kill Baron Harkonnen, and then they say, for the next act, meet me in the residence. And that's almost like that's like the preamble to the rest of the story. Like, Arrakis is good. Now let's turn towards the galaxy and what Paul's going to do. So it's interesting the way that it was all structured.
I'm definitely excited to see, because I feel like there's more houses around that we haven't seen yet. That we're eventually going to see. Like,
yeah, maybe we've really seen 3, I think.
Yeah,
total.
really 3. So, and I guess if you consider the witches, I'm not sure what their names are. That's kind of a house. Bene Gesserits, even though they're kind of intertwined.
They're not on any sides, though.
They're on every side, kind of.
Yeah.
But they're like you said, I mean, from the very start of this podcast, when you were explaining it, Charlie, saying like you have all these men in power on the face of like each house, so and so, but then you have these Bene Gesserits who are literally pulling the strings on everything from behind, and that's what's awesome. And like we also see that when Lady Margot goes to Arrakis, and you know she forces, she has a kid with Fade. Fade, you know, she has
Didn't force him.
Yeah, it didn't force him, but
Manipulated him.
Yeah, manipulated him, and now they did that, and it was all calculated. Like it's not like, oh, she just went there and did it, and then the next scene she's like, yeah, like I have a spawn of Fade.
Because it's the importance of the bloodline too.
Yeah, exactly.
Which so will come in. It'll come in the next story. It's important that the Harkonnens are still around.
My girlfriend was dumbfounded when Paul asked for the princess's hand to the Emperor. She couldn't believe it.
Oh, really?
She's like, "With Zendaya back there, he's gonna do that?" And I'm like, "It's all about power. It's about the bloodline. It's about, you know, she is just a random person. She does not hold any true power in the eyes of, you know, democracy." And so the way things work, and so I'm like, it made complete sense to me. And even the first time watching it, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Not just because Florence Pugh looks like Florence Pugh, it's because, you know, her name, right? So, yeah.
So, and not to belabor the point I was making earlier, but that's a change. Chani's reaction, the woman scorned vibe that she puts off when Paul's like, I'm going to marry you and take over everything. And they look at Chani and she's like, this look of betrayal. Chani expresses some of that in the story, but Paul never loses the connection with Chani. Like they're the real relationship, and everyone knows that this is a marriage of convenience, him and Irulan, even the two of them, and they talk about it. Chani being almost like, I'm out of here, screw you guys, is a change. That's not what she does. She stays by Paul the whole time. She's like the loyal serving wife thing, and they changed that in the movie. And honestly, I kind of like it, and I'm interested to see how it factors into the rest of the story, because there is this tension between her and Irulan in the next story, because they're both basically married to Paul.
Right.
So.
And they're clearly leaving Arrakis at the end, so it's like, and she stayed, so how do they get her back with them? And so yeah, it is super interesting to see.
And that's cool, because like a lot of people have read the books, right? So like we need something to keep it interesting. Like, oh, I don't know how they're going to do this. You know, now I'm interested. Like,
put their own spin.
Yeah. My take from that is also like before he like says he's going to take the princess's hand, Florence Pugh, he says right to Chani when he's walking by, like, every breath I take is for you. Yep. So you know that it's still there. But then, like you said, I mean, her face, she's like dumbfounded. She's pissed.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's like even the book readers, they don't know what's to happen next with Chani's character. But I mean, me personally, if I could just spitball like something, make up like my expectations or what I think is going to happen, I think that, I don't know, because she's on Arrakis still, like she's going to be living in the desert. So I don't know if she creates her own army and in this holy war, she goes to battle with them, or she just plays like Paul's hand, because Paul's eventually going to come back for her, or he's going to find a way to, you know, meet up with her once again and, you know, kind of be like, you know, I had to do this, explain himself, which we know is going to happen. But I wonder if she's going to be, obviously she's going to play a part in the third movie. Say Paul's going to do something crazy like he was when he found the shelter with all his dad's artillery. You know, that she was like, you're not using this, like so-and-so. He's like, but I have to, you know, like this is how we win. And she's going to be that other voice in his head, you know, telling him, like, maybe even manipulating him to go back to the old Paul instead of dictator Emperor Paul. So,
well, yeah, and there's still spice there, and there's the warhead, so obviously there's stuff there that's still resources for them. So, yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, that final fight too, it was just so intense. I was at the edge of my seat. My palms were like completely sweaty. Like I didn't know what was going to happen. Yeah.
I have like a small like heart condition, and like my heart started freaking out right during that fight. I was like, oh crap, here we go. I was like so intense. I was like, oh my gosh, there goes my AFib. Bop, 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 bop.
That's the thing too, is like it's not even like it's a fairly quick battle, but it's not too fast. So like you're going, you see like they're going in. I mean, Paul, like every time, like he's just cocky. He goes into this fight and he's like stripping his jacket off his robe and he's like, all right, like let's go. Like he doesn't have any like second thought in his head that he's like, oh, maybe I could lose. And Fade obviously has nothing to lose. He's just a psychopath and he needs this. And he goes and then you see Paul like start doing those spinning, flying like dodges and shit like that. I'm like, what is going on, dude? You have no idea what's gonna happen. And Fade is obviously winning that fight at the beginning.
Yeah.
And everyone's just standing there watching. Like this is like the future. Like everyone's lives depends on this fight right here. All the Fremen, everyone on Paul's side, like they're obviously gonna get taken out if Fade wins this.
Yeah.
And, and that's kind of where you guys can take over, but like I don't know, man. Like,
well, I have a question for Charlie. Now, Charlie, is it considered dirty play if he were to use the voice in like a 1v1 situation like that? Is that like frowned upon, or I was curious. Yeah, I was curious why not use the voice when in a fight like that.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. I don't know what gentlemen of Arrakis would require of their duels. I would think that would be bad form. That would be foul play. Yeah, because you would totally just like tell him to drop his knife and he would do it. And there's no reason Paul wouldn't have done that. Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Cut his bite.
Yeah.
So,
real quick, him yelling at the Reverend Mother too.
Oh, that was sweet.
That's what you're gonna say. Dude, yeah.
That was sweet. That was so sweet.
That was cool.
I was actually gonna ask you guys like, give me your best The Voice impression, but
I need an echo.
Mine is terrible.
But that's the other thing too is like you see in part 1 like Lady Jessica's training Paul into the ways of using the voice, mastering it. Nothing's better in that first part than when they're on the carrier on the helicopter and she's like, untie me, kill him, like that. Mm-hmm. It's like holy shit.
You see the real impact of that skill. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like she's like, your pitch wasn't there, and he's like, she's still yelling at him like after the fact that she just saved him. But you go in this entire part 2, I'm waiting for Paul to use the voice, whether it was going to be to manipulate someone into thinking that he's Lisan Al Gaib or he's going to win a battle, but he doesn't do that. And that's where we were talking Tarantino films before this film. And I'm like, once upon a time in Hollywood, you're waiting. Like, where's the Tarantino effect? Yeah. Where's the blood and gores? And then the last 10 minutes, shit hits the fan. And then you see this, and you have all those like high-tiered Bene Gesserits, the main one, and he goes and I don't know what he says exactly. You guys are gonna have to tell me, but he uses it and it knocks them all back.
I think he says silence.
Yeah.
It's like they're all real like, condescending.
And that's when they were like, now they're like, they're locked in. They're like, all right,
she's like,
because she said that to him in the first movie.
Yeah.
So how good is that? So the parallels. Okay, so think about the parallels of this scene in The Residence and the first movie. You've got she says silence to him and then uses the voices. How dare you use the voice on me? He used the voice on her with the very same thing. The fight between Fade and Paul, right? It's a knife fight. They come down to the end. Fade stabs Paul, and then as he's going in to kill him, Paul uses the knife that he's been stabbed with to stab Fade. That's exactly like when he's fighting Gurney Halleck. Remember when they're fighting that little spar, and he's like, I got you, old man. And he's like, yeah, but I would have taken you with me, which is exactly what Paul does. He takes Fade with him, even though Paul doesn't die. So
like there to witness that too.
Yeah, exactly. You're seeing all this training and everything he's learned from all these people in his life that care about him, and he uses all of it in that moment to realize his destiny, which is fundamentally kind of awesome, but also super dark. Because it becomes there was also awful thing.
There was also a vision in the first movie, and a lot of people think maybe it's the Holy War, but he's in this cool armor and he's doing these flips and fighting and killing people, and then like the visor comes up and you see his eyes in the first film. Very similar sequence with Chani when they're doing the attack at the end, doing the same moves and everything, and then it zooms in on her eyes. So I saw that too on Twitter, being like those two visuals being compared to each other.
I definitely then obviously too,
that's a great point. I forgot about that. Yeah.
So that's pretty cool too. So it's like, is that for the third movie, or is that like supposed to be Chani? Like, I don't know. So
I think that just shows that Paul's visions are not definitive. There's a semblance of truth in his visions, but certain details can get mixed up. It might be Chani in the armor. It might be him in the armor. There's different ways it could go.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah,
and
I'm sure some Jamet stuff is Stilgar stuff too. I'm sure.
Yeah.
For his visions.
Yeah.
But we do have that one flashback of that vision that Paul keeps having, and it's with the bloody hand and the knife, and we still haven't seen that yet. So I think that, I don't know, maybe eventually me just rambling, making shit up.
Oh, no. Now that you say it, I know what that's going to end up being.
I think he kills his mother. I could be right, I could be wrong, but I think he just... And I thought he was going to take his mom out in part 2. I thought he was going to, like, because he was...
And this is a prediction, not a spoiler for the book.
Yeah, we don't know. We don't know. I mean, I know, but we don't know.
We don't know.
But that's what I keep thinking, because, like...
That'd be cool, Aiden.
We saw that, I'm like, all right, he's going to end up, like, killing his mother, like, because she's spewing all this false knowledge and stuff like that. I thought he was going to get fed up. And that was kind of the part where he was dead set on staying north while everyone migrated south. And he's like, I'm not going. And then finally he goes, I'm like, because he like has that still shot. He's thinking, he's like, I'm going to have to go confront my mother, who's this high power I thought was going to be in the South.
And in Aiden too, like, she's the one person he really can't control anymore. Yeah. You know, I mean, he can control everyone in his life but her, really. So yeah, that's an interesting take.
And I can see that happening. Do you guys remember the part?
Him in more ways than one.
Yeah.
And in part 2, when she kind of had that Smeagol outbreak, like towards the beginning. Where when she's like you need to do this, and he's like no, like all that stuff. It's like right at the beginning, her eyes, she's like screaming using the voice kind of.
Oh yes,
yes. When she was first conversing with his sister.
Yep.
With Aaliyah.
That's right.
And she has a Smeagol outbreak. I'm like, oh, she's off the rails.
Yeah, she gets out there. That's wild. But no. I found it interesting that Rebecca Ferguson did very little promotion for this movie. Did you guys notice that? Like, all of it was the young cast. Yeah. Like, she didn't do much. I was worried that maybe they would have changed her character because she wasn't out there a lot. Like, they had, like, they had all the core folks, right? And then they also had Stilgar. They had Gurney Halleck. But they never had Rebecca Ferguson in on any of this. I was like, what are they up to? Why is she not here? And then after the movies come out, she's done some stuff on some of the late night. But I thought that was interesting because her character is so crucial and it's so good.
Oh,
yeah.
It's like, why wasn't she
in promotion? Like, they do have those 5 faces, Florence Pugh, Zendaya, Timothée Chalamet, Austin Butler, like those guys. No one's taking screen time from them. Like, that's your money. Those are your money makers. But story-wise, Rebecca Ferguson, 100%.
Well,
I had no idea that Javier Bardem was in this movie until we saw him. I'm like,
it's good.
How do you just leave that out?
Yeah, exactly. Javier Bardem takes a back seat in this movie, which is ridiculous. Yeah, but like to have a sci-fi movie have 4 of the biggest actors in the world right now as the main characters, like, that's so unique. Think, what's another sci-fi movie that has that big of names? They might have one like leading man kind of thing, or they have no one you've ever heard of. But to have like this ensemble cast of super influential actors, that's awesome. That's so good for sci-fi. That's good for nerds like me.
You could compare it to would be Marvel, but those people are only famous because of their roles leading up to those big epics like Avengers. Yeah, but you go, I mean, we were just talking about this the other day because all these movies that come out with this ensemble cast where you have like Amsterdam, for example, was one recent one that I watched. It has, God, I'm going to draw a blank on everyone now. John David Washington. It has Margot Robbie. Taylor Swift's in the movie.
What?
Everyone's in it. Whatever. Christian Bale's like one of the lead characters, and I'm watching it, and it was a complete flop. Just like that other one with Margot Robbie.
Or something.
Yeah,
Babylon.
That other one, Babylon, was another one that was an insane cast, and it was a complete flop.
Was it? I thought that was like nominated for some stuff.
It did get nominated. It did do well box office wise.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, but either way, everyone that said it, critics were like, "This is terrible."
Yeah.
But you go, I mean, that's why, like, I'm so glad when they announced Denis Villeneuve was doing Dune Part 1. Like, let him roll. Let him do whatever he wants. Just like
Hell yeah.
Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau with Star Wars. Give it all to him. Just give him the keys, let him drive. And that's like Denis Villeneuve, and you see it from all his movies. Like, one of my personal favorites is Enemy with Jake Gyllenhaal, and it's a super short film if you haven't seen it. But it has to do with, he's like, he has a split personality, and he's playing two different characters, living two different lives, and it's all in his head. And then there's like the spiders like show up randomly, stuff like that, and it takes place in Canada. It just doesn't make any sense. I've seen it twice, still doesn't make sense. But you go, but that's why like you just love those movies, man. It's so dark, and you know what's coming, and you're still like the very last scene. If you've never seen it, or if you need,
I've never seen it. Yeah,
dude, go watch Enemy. You'll literally look it up immediately. You know a movie's good when you look shit up right after you watch
what was that? Oh, I need to know.
Yeah, it's like, this makes zero sense. There's got to be a secret meaning behind it. And he does it on purpose. He's like, no, like, he bases all his movies off books. So he goes, he's like, yeah, I read this book and I thought I had a great idea for it. And he's like, I don't even get it. He's like, that's the best part of it. So, but
and the fact too that Villeneuve and Hans Zimmer they're huge nerds of the books when they came out, and that's why they wanted to do the movie together. So I think that's just really cool too in itself. And I do think the core four that we talked about earlier, like Timothy Chalamet, Zendaya, Austin Butler, and Florence Pugh, I think those are like going to be the big actors going forward, just like in the movie industry.
Yeah.
From the films they've been in to this. Like, they will be the new Leo and Brad Pitt,
Ford,
like
yeah.
Harrison Ford, like those guys. And so that's really cool to see, to what Charlie was saying, for all of them to be in this film together and have these huge parts. I think is really cool.
And it works.
Yeah.
And it's a good movie. The first one was great, and the second one's even better. Like, that's what's rare. And that's what I was getting with, like, Babylon and Amsterdam. Like, those movies, you're like, oh, great, my favorite actor's in this. Oh, look who else is in it. In this one, you know that it has a stacked cast, and then while you're watching, you're like, holy shit, people are just popping up. And it doesn't affect, like, the way, like, it's not a forced scene or something like that. Like, Christopher Walken as the Emperor is insane. Javier Bardem as Stilgar. Like, yeah, it's like, holy shit. It just makes it better every time someone pops up. So,
and I know the people I saw it with, Stilgar was a fan favorite of theirs, one of their favorite characters. So, I mean, as for me as well. So, you know, and he obviously didn't have a ton of screen time, but I think even what that actor can do with the amount of screen time he had, the writing, everything like that, made sense to me as to why, he just killed it. So, but yeah, we can get into scores here if you guys are good. Mm-hmm. I know after we've been recording for almost an hour and a half now, and I know when we're done with this, it's gonna be like, damn, I forgot this scene, or damn, I forgot to talk about this. That's how it always is, especially for a movie like this. As long as it is, a lot of great stuff in it. So. But yeah, Aiden, if you want to go first.
Yeah, I'll start off. I mean, I'm not going to go back into the ramble I just had, but to dumb everything down, I'm going to rate this as a two-part, or as one. So I'm going to go 1 and 2. I don't know if you guys want to do it like that, because me personally, I didn't want to rate Dune Part 1 without seeing Part 2. Because, you know, it was obviously a build-up, as good as it was, but this, like I mentioned, seals all the confusion I had, all those like cliffhangers or tight ends, whatever you want to call them. It tightens everything up. It gave me a full completion of the story, and it made me appreciate Part 1 more after watching Part 2. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. You got like a watcher's high, or a viewer's high, I guess you could say, since we just watched it a week ago today. I can't wait to watch this again. And I don't know if I want to do the IMAX experience, but I'm for sure buying the 2-part disc when it comes out.
All those special features. Yeah. Give me those special features. We'll do a new show on that.
100%. But I mean, I don't want to like abuse it, but I mean, this has been sitting like a week before we saw it. It was sitting at like a steady 96. And I think it's still like at a 95. But me personally, for an entertainment factor, seeing this in the IMAX theater, an epic scale that it was, in each part, like I mentioned, thinking that it was going to get cut, fulfilled everything. Every part that I wanted to see in this movie, got to see it. I think I'm going a solid 96. 96 out of 100.
That's good.
We take that as like, I would 100% recommend this to someone. My grandma and grandpa, I was telling them, they're like, haven't gone to the movies in forever. I'm like, go watch Dune. I'm like, you don't even have to know the lore. I didn't know it. You just go in, and that's why it's like fresh. Like, as long as those books have been out, Like, this is like the start. Like, oh, I always wanted to get into Star Wars, but I never did. Oh, I always wanted to watch Lord of the Rings, I never did. Now you have no excuse. You got 2 movies, and who knows how many we're gonna get. Go take the time, go watch it. So
Yeah,
I feel confident in that.
that's a good score.
I love that.
Yeah.
Charlie,
You may go. Yeah.
It's up to
Well,
you,
I
bro.
like taking them both. I like scoring them both, and then kind of a combined score. That's kind of how I'm thinking about them.
Okay.
You know, as much as I love number 2, one criticism that we haven't talked about, I feel like the first 30 minutes are clumsy in the way they fall into the story, right? There's the opening scene with the guys floating up the rock, which is cool as hell. But from there until like they're attacking the mining ship, I'm like, what's going on? Like, I feel like we're like stumbling our way back into the desert of Arrakis. And I didn't love that. And I felt like they could have better transitioned the beginning of 2 from 1. So like that's the only negative really that I have on the second movie. I honestly think the first movie is almost perfect.
Mm.
I I can barely think of anything that I would rate it as being negative. It absolutely blew my mind. I mean, I have to score it. I don't like giving 100 because that's crazy, but I'm gonna give it 99 for sure. I'm gonna give it 99 number 1. The second movie was still so good despite what I feel was a little bit of a clumsy start. I felt like the movie was what, 3 hours, 2 hours and 50 minutes. It could have been 2 hours and 30 minutes, and it could have just tightened up that first part just a touch. So I'm going to give that 95, and I'm going to land on a solid 97. One notch above Aiden's, 97 out of 100. The best sci-fi movie I have seen to date. Until Villeneuve's next movie, this is the greatest sci-fi movie I've seen.
So you feel
And
confident in part 3 being better than both?
Well,
I think
part
it's just gonna get better.
yeah, part 3 is a part of this.
Yeah.
Villeneuve's got something in the works, guys, that is going to absolutely blow everyone's mind. I hope it happens, and when it does, we're going to go see it. He's doing this Arthur C. Clarke story called Rendezvous with Rama, and it's so good.
Ooh.
So, anyways, 97 out of 100. Love it.
Solid.
Oh, nice. Okay. And is that like his next project? Do you know, or
It
like
is
that'd be before Dune Messiah, right?
no. It's probably going to be after.
Oh. Okay.
He's got Dune 3. He's doing Cleopatra, something with Cleopatra, and he's got one other film. I don't know what it is, but he talks about the secret project that he can't talk about. It's 100% got to be Rendezvous with Rama. They've been talking about it for years. He did Arrival. He did this. He's got to do Rendezvous with Rama, and it's so good. So I think it'll be in the next 5 years. He'll bring that movie out, and that could potentially be the best.
Cool. That is exciting. Yeah, it's funny because when we did Dune Part 1 last week, I'd only seen it twice. I watched it once when it came out, and then I watched it again for the review. And, we said it back then, or last week, that, like, it sucked seeing it on our TVs and not going to experience it in the theater. And I can't imagine experiencing Dune Part 2 not in a theater. And I think that's really what drove me to go see it again, is because, one, I really enjoyed it, but two, I just wanted to experience it on the big screen just one last time before it, goes to DVD or Blu-ray. So I think that's kind of what hurt my impact on the first one. Also, too, like, I didn't know anything about it when watching it the first time. Even the second time, I was starting to learn more things about it. But after watching Part 2, it did open up my mind a lot more as to, a lot of answers that the first one didn't really get a chance to answer. And I really appreciated that about both movies. So I think my opinion on Part 1 has gone up a lot higher than even what it was last week. I've seen it twice. I've seen Part 1 twice in the last week. And then I've also seen Part 2 twice in the last 2 weeks. So it's really just been Dune nonstop, and I love it. It is awesome. I think for 1, I gave it an 81 last week, and I think I'd be high 80s now just because what Part 2 did for me. And Part 2, originally I was going to give it a 95, 96. I enjoyed it so much more even the second time around. I'm going to 98 on the movie there. It's even better the second time. We went with Siri too, who came with us for the first opening night, and he even enjoyed it more the second time around. So I'm really excited for you guys to go see it again. I'm sure you will.
Go see it.
I'm seeing it Sunday. Yeah, my wife's going with me. It's gonna be good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, she's probably really excited.
Yeah. I didn't mention to see if this would persuade any of your scores, but that opening scene where they're chanting and it's the narration, it's the quote, and it's just power over spice is power over all. Like I remember we looked at each other
Dude, and then the logo. and then they did the logo.
You just knew you were in for a treat, man.
Right.
And then you
a little cold open.
Yeah, but it was just that you're that just when we saw it, you see the IMAX ticking and it's going from 10 down to 1, and you're just like sucked in. At that point, like your peripheral is just that screen. You're not looking at anything else. And then the walls shake and you just hear that chant, it's all black, you're just immersed. Now you're in the Dune universe. And I feel like that just helps it.
Yeah, and Charlie, I probably have like 10 or 11 movies personally to me that I consider like 100, like a Shawshank, Dark Knight I love, movies like that. But those are all movies I've seen 6, 7, 8 times already, you know what I mean, that I've experienced throughout my life. So it's hard for me to say Dune Part 2 is a perfect score yet because I've only seen it twice. This is one of those movies, though, where I could see it hitting my 100 out of 100, in my opinion. Like, if I just see it maybe a couple more times, this is easily one of those movies because it is so good. It's so amazing that I could see it definitely hitting that upper echelon of films. So
that's a good point. So can I reserve my right to change my score later? Right?
Yes.
I'll watch it again.
Definitely.
I watched Dune, the first one. I watched it, I think, every day for like a week straight because it was on HBO and it was in the theaters. I saw it in theaters and I watched it every day, and I just loved it. So maybe I watch this a few more times. We'll get some more takes. We'll get some more ideas. We'll refine our stuff. But in general, what an incredible movie, guys. It's cool. It's so fun to go see it with you guys, too. That was awesome.
Yeah, that was fun.
And that's like the first time he's came to the movies with us. We were rolling like squad deep. We got a whole row to ourselves, basically.
And this is how you knew it was amazing. We all stopped right after the movie walking out and just got in a circle and talked about it. Yeah. And that's one of those things where you know you've seen something amazing when you want to talk about it right away and see how others felt about it. So I thought that was really cool too. Yeah, man. I know most of the movies we see, we don't do that because
like I said, man, you have like a viewer's high after you watch a good movie. And like I went out like that weekend and I was just like thinking to myself, I'm like, God, or I got home that night and I was like, God, I just love good movies, man. Like, I'm like, there's no better feeling than just going and the anticipation building up for a new release. And then you go see it opening night and it just.
The hype of what people were saying.
And that's why I was like, I went in there like expecting it to be terrible because there's no movie that gets that much hype, that much press, and they don't pay people off. But then you have Denis Villeneuve. He doesn't need that. You know, like he knows what he's doing. Yeah, he's one of the best. So, I don't know. I'm excited. We'll be back for part 3.
Oh, that's exciting. I love that. Oh, it's going to be good.
No, and thank you, Charlie, for being on, too. This was like 10 times better than our Dune episode last week.
Like I said, please make it a promise to, like, this is going to release tomorrow. And just whenever you do have the free time to go, you're like, I want to listen to that. Go listen to part 1. You can't listen to part 2 until you listen to part 1.
Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to listen to part 1, and then I'm going to get in the comments on this. I'm just going to roast you guys. This is so much better than part 1.
We kept saying last week, we're like, don't worry, we're getting Charlie. We're getting a professional next week.
We're getting a professional.
Yeah, we had to keep saying that because we're like, we just sound like idiots. Yeah. So
no, it's good, guys. This is super fun. I appreciate the invite, and I'm glad to get some returns on all my nerd time I've spent in these books, so I'm glad to share it with you.
It pays off. Hey, maybe you'll be an extra in part 3.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Might have some poll here pretty soon, you know. We just got to keep recording. Keep blasting our names out there.
Yeah. Go to some premieres or something a couple weeks early. That'd be cool.
We'll open the Oscars one year.
Yeah.
Host the Oscars.
Yes. Yeah, speaking of that's our next week episode. We're going to go over Oscar winners, so but yeah, we'll be back Friday, and we'll see you guys later.
Yeah, man. Thanks, Charlie. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Charlie.
Yes, sir, man.